Good afternoon. It is Wednesday, October 5th, 2016, and we have a very, very dire situation for the northern Bahamas and the east coast of Florida, and potentially parts of the coastal southeast in Georgia and South Carolina, especially ongoing. This right here is Hurricane Matthew. He has emerged out of the mountainous regions of Haiti down here in eastern Cuba and is primed to re-strengthen later tonight and tomorrow morning and make a potentially devastating strike on these islands up here, the northern Bahamas, Nassau, Grand Bahama, potentially Abacos up here, and then parts of Florida along the East Coast. I'm thinking West Palm Beach northward. Right now, I think Miami escapes the worst of it, but it will still have to be watched because this is going to be a rapidly developing situation over the next few days. For as far as Matthew is concerned right now, if we look at the inner core, you say, well, he may not look that strong because these mountains down here did take a little bit of the punch out of him. However, if you look at this thing, you say, well, the eye's not really there. However, if we switch here to the visible satellite, you can still see a very, very well-defined center of circulation and a well-defined eye moving in a general northwest direction. It will wobble north and then wobble west and then wobble back north. But the general motion here is going to be in the north toward the northwest in this general direction for the next 24 to 30 hours. But in any case, we have a very, very well-defined core still intact here. And as time goes by and Matthew gets more time over these very, very favorable waters here over the Bahamas, you're probably going to see some re-strengthening here. Because it is done with the mountains. So once this gets time here, I do expect it to gain some momentum back. And when it does, it will start looking much clearer on this picture right here. And you can already see the higher cloud tops here. If you look to the bottom here on your little key, see these red cloud tops here are very, very cold, very, very intense thunderstorm cloud tops. So if Matthew is able to clear out the eye, it will start showing up again on this frame here, and then you could see these thunderstorms wrap around and become a donut-like shape again once it gets up here by tomorrow morning. That's what you're going to watch for. The National Hurricane Center, if I can pull up their map, here we go. Right now has this as a major hurricane riding all the way up north through the Bahamas and then toward the east coast of Florida. Everywhere you see here in red is currently under hurricane warning. So this includes most of the Bahamas, except down here in the Turks and Caicos. The easternmost Bahamas are not in it. These hurricane warnings over Cuba should be dropped in the next few hours as this thing moves north and lifts away. There was already a ton of damage in eastern Cuba, and I don't even want to begin to talk about how bad this was in Haiti for that nation. But as this heads north, you're probably going to see these hurricane warnings extend all the way up the coast into Florida and eventually into Georgia and South Carolina. The reason why they're not there yet is because it's more than 48 hours away. But you can see hurricane watches have already been posted here in pink here for the northern part of Florida. Tropical storm warnings up for much of the Keys in Miami, as there is a chance that they could see tropical storm force conditions on the west side of this. And the other thing I want to point out here is notice the hurricane warning around Lake Okeechobee here. The southern sections of Lake Okeechobee could see a surge here as when the storm goes by here, the counterclockwise wind out of the north could push water from north to south onto some of these coastal communities. So I think Canal Point and Pecauda. I know I'm pronouncing that wrong. I know there's another town that begins with P there. It's escaping me right now. But any coastal communities anybody living along the south side of Lake Okeechobee needs to pay attention to this because you could see hurricane force winds wrapping around from north to south if this gets close enough to the Florida coast and actually pile up a surge on the south side of Lake Okeechobee. If we look to this afternoon's GFS model, do not look at the pressure here. I'm just showing this for track. The pressure is going to be off on this particular model, and it is not a high enough resolution. This is going to be significantly lower than 991 millibars. So do not look at this and think, oh, it's only a 991 millibar storm. This will be significantly lower than that if we had a higher resolution model that that would show this. But the GFS, I'm showing this because I think the track is going to be pretty darn close here through about 3 days. You see, here it is coming out of the Bahamas here, moving in a northwest fashion, and then as it approaches this area here, just north of West Palm Beach, it turns, maybe makes a landfall, turns north-northwest, and rides the Florida coast. The eye could be half on the coast, half off, and rides it all the way up and then starts to make the turn right as the coast makes the turn in northern Florida and Georgia and continues to impact all of these coastal areas all the way up. I think that you could see extreme conditions here, hurricane conditions, all the way from West Palm Beach all the way up to Charleston, South Carolina, and maybe beyond, even up towards Wilmington, North Carolina, is possible in a 48 to 50 in a 48 to 50 hour period total as this is chewing up the coastline. But beginning, let's say on Thursday night, Friday morning here, and then riding all the way up the coast as conditions deteriorate as the system moves up. One of the things I wanted to talk about with this is that there's really not many great analogs for this storm because it makes it very, very difficult to sell how bad this is going to be, because usually when you get a storm of this magnitude making landfall, you start to zero in on one maybe 50-mile wide location that is likely to take the brunt of the eye wall, and that there could be extreme damage in that small little window. But what is going to make Hurricane Matthew's approach to the U.S. very, very unique is that it's not going to be one area if it takes a path anything like the GFS. It's going to be all of these areas up and down the East Coast, or up and down the Southeast Coast, from again, West Palm to Charleston. I would highlight this entire area needs to be highly, highly concerned and pay very, very close attention to what the officials are telling you. I know many places are already being forced to evacuate, and if you are told to evacuate, you should be doing it with this storm, because this is not one to mess around with. And the point is that instead of having one 50-mile wide, point where there's really, really devastating conditions, you could have hundreds of miles along I-95 here with severe surge, with long-term power outages, with property damage, with trees down, all the way up, if it takes a very, very close path to the U.S. Now, what you hope is that you get a path further offshore, because it would make a big difference if it comes up like this as opposed to like this, if you can follow the cursor here. Because if it runs right along the coast like the GFS is showing, the eye is going to be close enough to the coast so that the core is going to bring hurricane force winds all the way up, while staying partially over water so that it can maintain most of its intensity all the way up. If it stays a little bit further east, that's better, because the hurricane core doesn't get quite as close to the coastline and maybe just brushes it. There will still be heavy impacts, but it wouldn't be as bad. And if it goes a little west, it would be better for places up north. Obviously, it's bad for places down south if it makes landfall, but if it makes landfall, it could take some of the punch out of it before it comes all the way up the coast. Looking for analogs on this storm of what it's going to be doing over the next 3 days, I can really only find two really good ones. There are others, but there's two that I like the most. And so I'm going to bring them to you. First up is Hurricane David. In terms of track, we see this Hurricane David was a Category 5 in the Eastern Caribbean, but it plowed right into central Hispaniola, and these mountains really chewed up. We saw what they did to Matthew. Matthew took a track right over the eastern tip right over the western tip of Haiti, right over the eastern tip of Cuba, and we saw how that kind of messed with his core a little bit. I'll go back here as you can see this. The core is still intact, but it's not quite as healthy looking as it was. Going back to David's track, David actually, you can see here by the color, actually briefly weakened to a tropical storm after his interaction with these mountains, after going over Hispaniola and then eastern Cuba. Matthew did not do that. Matthew is still a Category 3 hurricane with a pressure of 962 millibars. So, the point is this. David took a very, very similar track after exiting eastern Cuba as Matthew is going to do, at least through Georgia. But David never fully recovered because of the track it took over Hispaniola, where it went right over the 10,000-foot mountains. You see back here, David did get back to a Category 2 hurricane, briefly getting to winds of 100 miles an hour, but the pressure never dropped back below 970 millibars. Matthew is way down here still, and the pressure is already at 962 millibars. So there is a very, very good chance that you could see a 15, 20, maybe even 25 millibar drop before Matthew gets up here to the east coast of Florida. Notice how David re-strengthened. If Matthew also re-strengthens, you're going to be dealing with a much stronger hurricane than it showed here. So the track of David is probably the best track that we have for an analog, but intensity-wise, there's not going to be comparable. It's not comparable. The other one we can use, go all the way back to 1893, the Sea Islands hurricane. Notice the death toll, 2,500 people. Obviously, they did not know it was coming, but even if they didn't know it was coming, this shows you the type of damage that a Category 3 hurricane riding along the Florida coast in this manner and running into Georgia like this can do. And this was an absolute disaster for the Southeast. And you have to go back 123 years to find a hurricane of this magnitude that rode the coast like this in Florida and did not make one direct landfall point. So this is a highly concerning situation. Again, if it takes the track of the GFS showed, hopefully it sways more in one direction or the other, and you do not get this scenario because it will be utterly horrendous for the coast all the way up. The other thing I wanted to point out is notice Florida's population here. It is very, very heavy all the way along the east coast of Florida. And if I can, here's the image I wanted. Fortunately, these areas down here, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Dade, and Broward County, right now it looks like you're going to escape the worst. I don't want to say you're out of the woods, so you got to monitor it very, very closely, but I do think that the core of the hurricane is going to miss you just barely to the northeast. But from West Palm Beach north, all of these areas here are under the gun. You see, all these areas are very, very, very heavily populated. Unlike, look at back over here, remember where Hermine came in this area over here, some of the least populated areas of Florida. Not so with Matthew. It could come all the way up and hit all of these areas. And the other thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to pull up this map here of Google Earth. And we can look at this here because what is really significant about what we're seeing here is I'm gonna take this map of the Southeast and I'm gonna turn it on its side. So we're still looking at the Southeast here, but I want to turn it on its side because what I wanted to illustrate here is notice this part of the South Carolina, Georgia, North Florida coast. When you turn it on its side, you can see that it is a bowl. It forms a bowl when you look at it from this vantage point. I'll put it back straight up. And if you have a hurricane moving north-northwest like this, and the counterclockwise flow around the hurricane is going to be in this fashion, circling the center of the storm, you are going to pile obscene amounts of water into that bowl. So the storm surge is going to be utterly horrific as you go up. So what you're going to end up with is you're going to pile water into Jacksonville, into Savannah, into Charleston, into Hilton Head Island, into all of these places because the water is going to be coming in from southeast to northwest and piling against the coastline, and it's going to have nowhere to escape because all of the counterclockwise motion of the hurricane is going to keep pushing it on shore until the eye goes by, and the only place for it to go is up. And that's going to be up into houses, into trees, into property, into all kinds of stuff that is sitting here along this densely populated coastline, at least in Florida. It starts to get a little more marshy once you get up into parts of Georgia and South Carolina. But in any case, there's going to be extreme impacts. If we look at what the European model did today, this was shared by Dr. Ryan from Weatherbell on Twitter, and this image right here just shows these are hurricane force gusts. These are not sustained winds. These are gusts. But everywhere, if you look at the key here, from this brown shading up, that is hurricane force gust. And again, right from close to West Palm Beach, Florida, all the way up the coast could see this. So you're talking power outages, you're talking property damage, you are talking trees coming down, and you are talking about a highly disruptive event. If you play it out here with less detail, you can see it when it goes out to the Carolinas. This is just a very, very serious event that is about to unfold over the Southeast, and unless something dramatically changes, Matthew is going to go down as one of the worst hurricanes that this region has seen in a very, very long time. That's all for today.